I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who's going to talk a lot more about the importance of supporting science journalism for a functioning democracy, which we only just really scratched the surface of in this last conversation. Maya Ajmera is president and CEO of Science for Society and the publisher of Science News, and she is up next. Thank you, Maya.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for giving us a voice and space of those in the world of science journalism. Today, I'm Maya Ajmera. I'm president and CEO of the Society for Science and publisher of Science News. And today, I'm excited to talk to you about my own thinking around science literacy and democracy. So the state of science journalism, science journalists and their content have been cut from newsrooms across the country. And I don't think that's news to this room, but it's been happening for more than a decade now. A few of the large newspapers and magazines do have dedicated science journalists, science newsrooms, but they reach an elite and paying audience. And of course, many local news outlets lack the trained staff to cover science-related topics. So who are the players, right, in the consumer landscape of nonprofit science journalism? There's us, Science News. There's Undark, which is out of MIT. There's Science Friday, which many of you may hear on Friday afternoons. There's KAISER Health News. There's Noble Magazine. There's so many that I'm missing, like Grapevine Health, led by Dr. Fitzpatrick, and others. The ones on the bottom are news outlets like NPR, PBS NewsHour, The Conversation, AP News, where science journalism is a vertical. Okay, so they cover all of news, but it's a vertical. And that's sort of the landscape, and I'm probably missing quite a few, but forgive me for that. So let me tell you a little bit about Science News. We were co-founded by E.W. Scripps and Bill Ritter. E.W. Scripps, the publishing magnate. And he was very concerned over 100 years ago about the vast quantity of misinformation in the newspapers. And he said, there's a vast quantity of misinformation being constantly spread abroad by our newspapers. We know that a small portion of the great human story that is being unfolded daily by the scientific institutions, government, and industrial research bureaus, and by individual pioneers the world over, finds its way into the American press. So he basically said, we have to create a new cadre of science journalists. And there came Science News. We celebrated our centennial last year. Science News, I'll tell you, I came in 2014. We were like all news organizations, media organizations. We were in serious debt. We were not going to make it. I was told by my board to sell Science News, shut it down, or make it sustainable. And I'm pleased to say that 8 years later, we are now bullish and sustainable. And if anybody wants to know the story, we can have a drink sometime. But it has been an incredible journey. So yay. Thanks. Thank you. So quickly, Science News Media Group, we have a print magazine that's been around for 100 years. We also have a major digital presence. And we get millions of people onto our site. Over half of our stories are social-based science stories, science that affect our daily lives. So the COVID outbreak and reporting on COVID became a huge, huge piece of our work, and still is, as is climate change, as is the things that are going on in Jackson, Mississippi right now with water. So that's who we are. So I want to go into this idea of scientific literacy for democratic decision making. I read a lot. I follow quite a few social scientists in this work, and there's one thinker. His name is Hagop Hakubian, and he really researches on how citizens can be empowered to develop a critical mindset and engage in democratic decision-making processes. His main focus, though, has been the importance of building scientifically literate citizens. And he goes even deeper about thinking about how do we reach young people in developing that critical mindset. I've actually thought about this quite a bit from his research as well as others, and I think access is really, really key. Accessing scientific content that is accurate, understandable, and readable. Finding scientific content in unique and diverse platforms. Developing scientific content that connects to proximity, meaning connecting close to home. Why does it matter to me? Having content available free of charge to local newsrooms so they can republish important science-based social stories. And ensuring that classrooms across the country have excellent content to support middle schools to high schools, and I would even say elementary schools. So who's doing what? In the last 5 to 8 years, we have seen so much crop up in this work. One is called Sciline, created by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. They're editorially independent. Their work is fully funded by philanthropies, but what they do is that they increase science and quality of scientific evidence in news stories. They connect reporters quickly to scientific experts and validate evidence. And they really work to amplify the voice of scientists. And everything that they do is for free. I'm also going to pick on KAISER Health News. KAISER has done something quite interesting on content linked to proximity. And so they've done something that newspapers used to have, which were bureaus across the country. They've created bureaus throughout the United States to report on proximate issues of health. And one example, is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is supporting their reporting in Georgia and the South. So I think when Dean Cobb talked about people from the top coming in and doing a story that's local versus people that are local doing the stories has a huge impact. Local news impact is that how do you get science content for free? At Science News, we provided all of our COVID-19 coverage, and still do for free, to republish in local newsrooms. We work with over 800 local news outlets and work on getting our stories placed. The hard part of that is, how do you make that constant? How do you create those partnerships of constancy versus emergency? KAISER Health News provides their content to be republished for free, as does The Conversation. And then lastly, when I went back to Dr. Hakubian's work, one of the things that he talks about is starting early, about developing the critical mindset. At Science News, we created Science News Learning in 2015. And what we've done is built a program where excellent science news content gets into classrooms. We work with nearly 20,000 teachers. They're not only STEM teachers, they are English teachers, they are social studies teachers. And we work with over 5,600 high schools. There's a huge waiting list, and reach about 6 million students. The teachers get a teaching guide. We also, to teach the content, this is content written by journalists. The other piece is Science News Explores, which is for the middle school market as well. And I'm pleased to say, because of what we heard from teachers needing excellent science content and also really looking at social issues around science, we launched the print magazine of Science News Explorers in May, really listening to teachers and parents who said, we don't want it digital, we don't want our kids near digital, we want it in print. So we've really gone warp speed on creating this magazine and building this into the classrooms. So lastly, I'll end with this, that with science literacy and democracy, including scientific literacy as part of civic engagement and democracy framework is critical. Science journalism has been out here. It's got to be part of the conversation about the democracy framework, and I believe it really hasn't. We need to continue to invest in the creation of superb, accessible scientific content, and we need to develop more partnerships and critical avenues and creative avenues for access to critical science content. That means we need to make sure that science content gets into local news outlets, into media outlets led by people of color or ethnic media outlets for different age groups, outlets that deal with gender-based media outlets, and I'm going to say another one called issue-based media outlets, based on what we just heard from the previous speaker. So I'll just end here very quickly that it's not about science news, it's not about all the other, it's really about thinking about how we see science, how we read science, and how do we reach everyone about developing a critical mindset. I'm thinking about what Dean Cobb said earlier this morning, is that there's 35% out there that we may not be able to convince, but we have to start somewhere. And I truly believe that we have to start with our young people in building this critical mindset, but we also have to reach everyone at the local level. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for listening to me today.